Hey folks, my name is Matthew Weiss. I am a frequent collaborator with Produce Like a Pro. I've been in many videos over the years, but I've never formally introduced myself, so I thought I'd take a moment to do that. So my name is Matt. I have a channel that's called Weiss Advice. I've been making records for probably about 25 years. I started when I was in high school. I tend to focus mostly on hip-hop, urban pop, reggaeton, EDM. So a lot of program-heavy genres, stuff like that. Probably my biggest discography is working with Akon. I do a lot of stuff with Akon and his artists, but I've worked with many other artists as well. Classic rock artists like Ronnie Spector, brilliant artists, rappers like Dizzy Rascal, Gucci Mane. It's a long list. So I don't know. I haven't looked at my discography recently, but and some really great Latin artists. Ozuna got a platinum plaque for that one. Farruko, Becky G, Anita, some really, really cool artists in that world as well. So yeah, I don't want to just sit here and introduce myself. That's not that interesting. So we're going to jump into a little segment called Fact Friday, where I answer frequently asked questions. Normally Warren does this, but I got it now. Ha!
What is your advice for someone who wants to get into the recording industry?
Okay, my advice for somebody who wants to get into the recording industry. Now, keep in mind that I'm coming from the lens of somebody who started when I was young in the late 90s and then went through the process of interning and assisting. For me, that process was the foundation of everything. So just being in the studio, getting hands-on, being with people who could give me some guidance, even if they weren't perfect, if they weren't the best in the world all the time, it doesn't really matter. It's just that experience of going through, being in the studio and being part of it and becoming comfortable. So for anybody who's starting, I still think in 2024, the best way to do it is just be in the studio by any means possible. Interning, paid or unpaid, assisting, low pay, whatever it might be, just being in there.
What is a lesson you've learned now that you wish you've known when you started?
A lesson that I know now that I wish I'd known when I was started is to never undersell yourself. There is this constant weight of desiring to get the gig, to make the most appealing offer. And you think that if you lowball yourself, that's going to get people interested in you because now you're more affordable and more accessible. And that is not the case. It actually works against you, and it's the opposite. You want to go a little bit, whatever you think is competitive for where you're at, you actually want to be asking for a little bit more. And that, believe it or not, ends up getting more people in the door.
So how do you get the gig?
So how do you get the gig? That is not something where it's like a door that you open or close. It's not like an on or off switch. Getting a gig is actually a very long-term process of consistently building up network connections and reputation. So my advice to anybody who's starting or trying to get that foot in the door, just say yes to as much as you can. And once, I know it kind of contradicts what I just said about making sure you don't lowball yourself, but the most important thing kind of goes back to that idea of just being in there and doing it as much as possible. So say yes to everything that you can say yes to, because what's going to happen is over time, the things that you can no longer say yes to, you can't say yes anymore because there's something else you said yes to that's more important, and it's more important because it's paying or because it's building your reputation or something along those lines. It will become a natural progression. But there's no getting the gig as like you throw off a smoke signal and then suddenly gigs come to you. It doesn't work that way. You have to build that reputation over time.
Starting out in recording and mixing, what is the first kind of setup you recommend for a beginner?
What kind of setup do I recommend for a beginner? So I would say recording and mixing, laptop, a space that is treated to some extent. Learn the DIY early on, meaning how to build some acoustic panels yourself. It's okay if it's in a bedroom. It's okay if it's in an extra room in a house or something that you're renting. You hang them on the wall. I would say don't spend more than like $1,000 on a microphone at first. I would go with something like Audio-Technica 4033A, something that's going to be fairly inexpensive, get the job done. Maybe couple that in with like an SM7, which is a nice clean dynamic, or maybe an RE20 if you're going for a nice vibey dynamic, but basically inexpensive microphones. Preamp, same deal. Having a nice preamp definitely improves things. Interface preamps are getting better, but they're still not great. An external preamp probably is still worth it. I just wouldn't spend more than $1,000 on it when you're just getting started. Probably keep it closer to like the $500 range-ish. Very minimal with the software. I would not recommend Pro Tools if you're just getting started. Pro Tools is an ecosystem. It's going to keep you paying. I feel like Logic and Ableton are probably a better start. Pro Tools might be good because you need to learn it. Every studio is using Pro Tools. Most of the professional engineers are using Pro Tools, so you are going to need to learn it. But for something that you have on your own for your own setup, I'd probably go Logic. In terms of signal processing and things like that, I would stay strictly in the box, just the minimum with what you need. And once you've got a setup that basically just gets by, then it's monitoring. Monitoring, I would go with, again, a fairly inexpensive set of monitors. There's a lot of good choices. Atoms are coming to mind right now for the inexpensive monitors. Kali's got some good inexpensive ones. And then I would pair that with something like Slate VSX. I'm a big VSX fan. I love that program. I still use it. I have a very expensive, I won't say how much, but let's just say a very expensive monitoring setup. And I still use VSX to check for translation. But the idea here is that all of the things I'm recommending are things that you are going to take with you. My first microphone was an Audio-Technica 4033A. I still use it. VSX, I have an extremely expensive monitoring setup. I still use it. So you want to be trying to future-proof your investments as much as possible early on.
Earlier we were talking about reverbs off camera. We were talking about reverbs.
How do you know what reverb is right for what you're trying to achieve?
Oh, that's a great question. So what reverb is right for what you're trying to achieve? First of all, the first thing is understanding that a lot of art is in the subjective world. So a lot of different reverbs can sound right. So the way that you orient yourself is by asking yourself, what is the intention? What is the emotional idea of this sound? Is it meant to sound somber? Is it meant to sound angry? Is it meant to sound jubilacious? What is the emotion behind it? And then start going through those reverbs and asking yourself, what is lending itself to that? What's got the proclivity that's giving the right emotion? You know, spring reverbs tend to sound a little weird and surreal. So if something's supposed to be kind of dark or uncomfortable, spring reverbs can kind of lend themselves to that right away. Whereas like a plate will give you a lot of high energy right up front, and there's no pre-delay at all. There's no attack window buildup. It's instantaneous. So if something needs to pop with some brightness, then that's going to give you that kind of like awake, high energy sound right off the bat. Dark halls and churches tend to have larger attack windows, so they build more distance into the sound. So if something's meant to sound lonely or sad, sometimes those are better ways to lean in. But it just becomes about being familiar with your different reverb options and understanding, being emotionally in tune with what that source is trying to do.
What is your advice for handling the toughness of getting and keeping gigs and having to hustle in this kind of work?
What is my advice for keeping gigs and keeping up with the hustle? This is going to be one of those things where I need to take my own advice because it's genuinely hard. But a relationship is like a good piece of electronics or gear. It's something that requires maintenance and upkeep. So you want to be following up with clients, even clients you haven't worked with in a while, just to make sure that they're good, to check in with them, to make sure that they have you in mind, and just to be very consistent. I find that there are certain attitude things that help quite a bit. Don't penny pinch, don't nickel and dime, let the small stuff go. Don't be overly assertive, but don't be under assertive either. Just be nice, consistent, not pushy, but still there, present. And always willing to say yes to what the client is looking for as much as possible. All right, I hope that answered some of your questions and you find this useful and also get you a little more familiar with me. I also have some excellent courses on Pro Mix Academy: mixing with emotion, mixing hip hop, recording drums, mixing rhythmic bundle, and that includes mixing urban pop, mixing dance pop, mixing acoustic pop, and mixing hip hop. So once again, I'm Matthew Weiss. Thanks for joining me here at Produce Like a Pro, and I will catch you next time.